Hello, my name is David Singh.
I'm
Hi,
Brett Schneider.
I'm Lena Larson.
And the name of our project is a search engine. I was responsible for implementing the backend in Java.
I was responsible for connecting the front end to the back end, along with some of the database work.
And I was responsible mostly for the front end and organization.
I'm just going to demo this a little bit. It's not fully functional because we had some time constraints with, we ran into a few problems early, but it's still relatively functional. The idea of the front page is that you'll be able to use these filters to filter through our database of cars. So we actually have, if you check this out right here, we actually have all of our cars in the database with all the different variables. And then if you do like sedan, you can hit search and you'll get the data is actually not formatted perfectly because of we kind of ran out of time a little bit, but you can kind of get the gist. It's grabbing everything from the database via a select statement that we use in Spring Boot, and I can show you. Basically, it's using the input from the filters on the first page, and it calls these functions right here, and it gets a list of cars from each of the from each little pool of like sedans or trucks or SUVs. So we do that, and then you can see that we get those. And if you go back, it actually, and we'll filter it for trucks this time. If you do that, then you have all the trucks that are in our database. So it's all printing just the type of car based on the filter right here. And then if you hit inventory up here, you can actually see that this is the entire inventory, and it's printed with a similar method. So we're just using for loops to print HTML to the front end. This is the entire inventory, and I know it might not be the prettiest in terms of output, but it still is using all the correct values that's in the database right here. And this is a Postgres database that we linked to our Heroku project.
So as you can see here, we actually also implemented an inventory tracker, and essentially this uses our observer pattern to print a statement anytime something is purchased. So we actually had David work on the observer pattern for a while, and we have a salesperson class that corresponds to the store, and it prints every time one's bought, and then eventually it runs out, and then it's keeping inventory all along the way.
Okay, so for the HTML, we used this cool thing called TimeLeaf, which made connecting the Java, like the front end and back end, a lot easier. So this is the drop-down menu. We have, obviously you can see like the types of cars and the years, and then down here we get like the type, make, and year to send it to the filters. We have our login page here. We have the top of our website for each of the different HTML files or pages. Then we have the create account and the forgot password button. So for the create account, we did not connect it quite yet to our backend, so our users are not saved, but we do have it all implemented in the back end. We just had problems with time constraints. So we have them enter their password, and then we have a forgot password page as well, where you can type in your email, and it doesn't do anything, but we were planning on implementing an error page to pop up. Then we have a car profile page we were going to create for when you wanted to buy a car, which would connect to all the different add-ins for like maintenance and radio and all that stuff. For the front end, we have, or for the back end, sorry, we have the car factory which gets the type or finds the type so we can implement it down here and connect this page back to our front end where it tells us the models, the makes, models, days and years, and all that stuff.
For the backend, we use 3 design patterns. They were factory method pattern, decorator pattern, and observer pattern. For the factory method, we created an interface of car that has getters and setters. And then right here in the car factory class, we check for the types of cars. And if it matches that type, it creates a new type of car. And here is an example of one. All the constructors and getters and setters. And for the decorator pattern, we use an extra feature that adds additional stuff to the car, such as rims or stereos. And the last pattern that we used was the observer method, which printed out the statement to say thank you to the buyer for the purchase, and also write into a separate file, a text file, of how many of that type of car we have left. So right here, we start with 10 of each type. And then we write it to this file, store inventory.txt. And then it checks it here. And if we are out of that car, it will say we're out of that type of car. And here is the observable that prints that statement. And in the main function, we have the creation of the cars and the decorator patterns and the observer as well. So right here, we have all the stuff. And then if we run this program, we're out of sports cars, like it says. We ran these 10 times with sports cars, just so we could make sure that it would actually get to 0 and printed that we're out of cars statement. And this writes to a text file right here. Right there.
And really quick, just lastly to touch on what we used. So we used Spring Boot, Maven, Postgres, and Heroku to deploy all this. So the Heroku was used to host the website, and it was also used to connect the database. It was used for mostly everything. It was kind of like the middle point that holds it all. So if you go here, you can actually see that it's connected to this Heroku database, and you can connect to it via the terminal like I was doing earlier, or you can go here and click on it and actually look at all the credentials. And then we used Spring Boot to display the website pages. So for each page that we wanted to display, you have to create a request mapping. You have to create this thing called a request map, and then you feed it in the link. So like observer pattern, for example, or search, and then you can fill out the function. You can fill out the function here, and it will actually display on the HTML page. So it was kind of a nice way to integrate all of our skills we learned from the object-oriented side with Java and integrate it with the HTML pretty seamlessly. So then the way we integrated it is we used the time leaf. So time leaf kind of connected the two. So just for example, in some of these functions, we have a thing called a model, and what that does is it uses time leaf to add some sort of string. So in this case, it was HTML string, and we added that to this model, and it's called messages. So now if we go check the search HTML, you can see that we used it right here, and that all we had to do was make a paragraph tag and then put the message in there. So I thought that was a really cool way that we integrated the Java with the HTML. And then as for Maven, I think, sorry, so Postgres we used for the database, as I mentioned earlier. And then the Maven actually helped us connect the database as well. So if you look over here at the very top, we have this came built in with the Spring Boot and with the Heroku. It gave us a way to connect to the database, and basically this uses a local environment like configuration and grabs the database URL, and it runs a few checks on it down here to make sure that it's not empty, and then we can then create a connection wherever we want to it. So most of our connections are in these, so you can see that we have like a try catch exception where we do the connection equals the data source, and if it works, then it executes all of these commands. So that's, I mean, about all the different things we use to integrate all of this together. And I think using Heroku with Spring Boot was really helpful, and we were able to accomplish a lot. Whereas starting off, we didn't really know what to use. So I think this was a pretty solid way to implement it all.
As far as issues with the front end and the HTML code, is when I originally wrote the front, like the HTML pages and deployed it locally, everything like worked out fine, pretty easily with just very clearly, it's very simplistic code. But once we tried to deploy it to Heroku, it went very sideways very quickly, and like all the centers and everything were out of place, and it just didn't link how it used to. So that was like a challenge, and I think like in the future it would be easier just to like start off writing with time leaf and all that stuff, just to like make sure everything works right off the bat instead of having to like change the code last second.
As for one more thing we were trying to implement but didn't have enough time for was using the login page to create a user database along with a linked favorites tab for each user. I think we would have been able to use a few more of the patterns that we learned in the class on that one. We just had, I mean, as we mentioned earlier, we had a constraint on time. But I think we could have used it. I mean, we had the create account page made, and we're just missing a little bit of code that would have added it to the user to the database. And then from there, we would have used the favorites to implement a few different patterns.